Welcome to Season 4 of the Knack for Business podcast.
Before we get into today's conversation, Canada Growth Network. Here's the math. A full CRM, email marketing, funnels, and automations for less than a coffee a day. That's $47 a month Canadian with a $1 trial to start. If you're building a business and still duct taping tools together, check the link in the show notes.
Why does change feel so scary, even when you know it's the right move? Well, if you ever felt frozen, resistant, or just plain exhausted by change, you're not alone, and you're not failing. Today's guest has spent years studying exactly what happens inside us when everything shifts, and she has a map. Guest today is Paige Harazin-Masi. Now, she has one of the most interesting career journeys I've come across. She started at Goldman Sachs, then McKinsey, then a private equity giant, then a mobile gaming startup backed by Sequoia, then a health company that does tech backed by major investors, and then she became a team of one. She's a leadership advisor, organizational coach who helps senior leaders figure out what's really going on inside their teams and what to actually do about it. She holds a degree in psychology from Yale and a master's in organizational change from Northwestern. She's coached executives through chaos, conflict, transformation at every level. She also volunteers with a special needs aquatics program in her community because, as she'll tell you, real change always starts with people. You can find her at partnerwithpaige.com. Paige, absolute pleasure having you here. Welcome.
Bernie, thank you. That was quite an intro. I'm going to try to bottle that for the future.
Absolutely. Do you have a favorite quote or saying you want to share?
Favorite quote or saying? Ooh, I would say, well, we'll get into this, but control the controllables is definitely one that I say not quite daily, but pretty close, and either internally to myself or externally to someone else.
Yeah. You can't control the wind if the wind's blowing, right? You just got to get out of the way.
Yeah, I think that's it. We're done. What a great metaphor for change.
Goldman Sachs
Yes.
to a team of one. That's quite the transition. When did you know that, yeah, you know what? I want to unplug from the large corporate space per se and be a solopreneur and look at the corporate space from the outside in?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, hindsight's 2020, right? So I would not say there was one singular moment. I would say there were sort of a series of choices that I made along the way that led to the next choice and the next move and the next risk and the next thing. And so, in the Goldman Sachs example, I was new in my career, right? So this was my first job out of undergrad. I had been there for 6 years through the 2008 financial crisis and recession, by the way, which was quite a time. And I was fried. I knew in my heart of hearts that I needed something different. I wanted to get out of New York, love New York City, but from the East Coast and wanted to just be in a new place, maybe try a different industry. And yes, thinking about those things was scary. And, there's always the devil you know versus the devil you don't. But I got to a point where in my gut, it was like I knew I couldn't stay. I couldn't not try those new things. And so as I've learned more recently, there's kind of a term for this, which is around survival anxiety, and survival anxiety needing to feel stronger than learning anxiety. So in order to, for me, feel like I was not just surviving, but going to be thriving, it was like, okay, that means I got to go learn something new. And I think that was the maybe first time I really learned that in earnest in a professional context anyway, and chose to take the risk, and it worked out.
You find that the corporate space obviously left an indelible mark, but do you think that the corporate space offers that kind of that training proving grounds for a person to
Absolutely.
realize
Yeah.
versus just starting out on your own going, you know what, I'm just going to be a solopreneur and try to talk to senior management?
I really think so. I think absolutely. I mean, if I'm as a senior leader myself, and if I'm a CEO, I'm absolutely thinking about credibility and experience and what is, who are people who are going to give me a new perspective or something that I don't know yet, right? And theory is great, but in my view, there's really no accounting for being there before or having walked in someone's shoes. And so, in my case, I think Goldman Sachs and McKinsey absolutely taught me, among other things, what a high bar looks like for talent, process, strategy, and how strategy, importantly, translates to operational execution, right? Like these places have been around for 100 years for a reason. So I was arguably thrown into the fire, and it was a real sort of series of eye-openers where I learned fast. I made a ton of mistakes, but I really began to have an appreciation for, what excellence means in real terms. and people around me who reinforce that in various ways almost every day. So I absolutely think it's a great training ground. For some people, obviously, then they continue on the linear path of climbing up that ladder, and good for them. But I also think realistically, more and more people these days have much less linear career paths. And I think that's actually a beautiful thing. So having lived one myself, as you said.
Change. I haven't been in the corporate space myself. Change management, everything about change. There's so much that comes around that. Why are we resistant to change? And why do we need so many different, this is the flavor of a module over here to help expedite change. And
Yeah. Well, I think, I fundamentally believe fear drives a lot of our behaviors, right? And so there's actually this cool framework called the SCARF framework, which is about SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And this is something that the Neuroleadership Institute has studied. And it basically says, look, from a neuroscience perspective, when you look at the brain chemistry and how it works, threat outweighs our sense of rewards. And as threat grows, your ability to be creative and collaborate with other people and your actual cognitive capacity goes down. So, for example, if I feel like my sense of certainty is threatened in today's world every single day, right? I need to be able to predict what's going to happen next or what is the next step in a process. If I don't have that need met, I'm going to start to feel stressed. And, the stress shows up in my body as like I get a little shot of adrenaline in my stomach and I'm already grabbing my shoulders and I'm feeling kind of tense. And then I'm more prone to behaving in some funny ways if I don't check it. And so I think that happens in various ways to a lot of people. And when change comes and one of those 5 areas is really threatened, it's a very real experience, and it's something we don't even consciously realize often. But I do think I think it's a good framework for how that can work in real life.
it almost sounds like if you haven't experienced change, like if you never have had a kid before, or you have not babysat a kid before, perhaps a toddler, that's change in motion continuously. Is it something you build up to, almost like a fitness program
Yes.
versus, ta-da, change?
Yes, I love that. And with all due respect to all the change management frameworks out there, which I use and which are still valid, I don't want to get myself in trouble with all my friends in organizational development and the such. But there is this new term out there called change fitness, which I love, and I'm a former collegiate swimmer and just a sports person, and so especially warm to this idea. But yeah, the idea of change fitness is this is a practice, this is a skill, this is like going to the gym 3 times a week, right? And it also has to do with mindset, because it's the old adage, it's not the destination, it's the journey. And I really like that because it gives more room for just learning, which I'm sure you'll hear me talk about later on, and frankly grace in our own human lives and condition, versus change management, which is it's a project. It's everything fits in a box on like a beautiful looking PowerPoint, and we are filling our need for control, but we're not necessarily operating with the idea that what if something changes tomorrow in the market or with our business, or there's a world event that we have to respond to. And so this is a different example, but I don't like dry January for this reason. So controversial topic perhaps, but it's like, okay, you changed your behavior for 4 weeks. This is great. We have checked this box. But then what actually happens on February 1st? You're like, oh my gosh, let's break out the wine, right? And so it gives this false sense of like doneness, and it doesn't sustain. And so, again, that's sort of an example of change management that I think when you translate that to a corporate environment, it doesn't work, right? It doesn't actually last because you don't get into this idea of it's a practice and it's a skill. And by the way, in today's world where things change by the hour and, AI is evolving faster than any of our brains can compute, it doesn't cut it.
Just sit back and enjoy the coffee and watch it go by, and then stick your foot in the water every once in a while and just get a sense of the temperature. Interesting. So if someone says they're fine with change,
Mm.
is that because they're not in the middle of the maelstrom and just actually sitting back and having a cup of coffee, watching it go by, going, oh, like some old lads sitting, if you think of a cafe somewhere in Europe, going, "Oh, that's interesting. I bet you know what's going to happen next." Is that when you're fine with change management, or
Yeah.
is that a practical statement to say that I'm fine with it and they're really flexible?
Yeah.
That's what it
Well,
comes down to.
yeah. I mean, I guess when I hear that, I first think, boy, that's a pretty broad strokes, right? I'm fine with all change, all kinds, all the time, in every context, in every moment. Like, that I have questions. So, the real answer is, well, maybe they are in context A, but what about context B? So, like, I'm pretty good at, on a small scale, dealing with changes in my calendar. If somebody cancels a meeting on me, okay, stuff happens. I don't, I'm good at that kind of change, but I'm much less good at being ghosted. If a client reads a proposal and then doesn't respond for 3 weeks, because, again, this to me is an example of, in my case, hey, I don't know what went wrong. I don't feel like I have control anymore. I can't force somebody to write an email back, right? But it's like, so I would say, if someone says I'm good at change, look a little deeper and maybe find some micro examples where, sure, maybe you are, and let's celebrate that and let's learn from it and let's share that with the masses. But let's also be honest about places where you feel like, hey, maybe I don't feel like I really know what's going on here. And some of those 5 fear activators are rearing, and let's explore that.
What are the 5 fear factors that are activating?
Yeah, so this is that scarf. So yeah, so I'll sort of say what I mean by this. So status is basically like, do I feel valued as a member of this group? Belonging is a common term that we've heard before. So when we feel like we have status in a group, we feel rewarded. Our reward centers of the brain are doing happy dances, right? Certainty, we've talked about, is that predictive ability to say, like, I know what's going to happen. Autonomy is about the need to feel control over one's own life. So this is a big one in today's era. Relatedness is the need to be part of a group. And so there's a bit of a distinction with status, but it's like, it's easy to create an in group and it's easy to create an out group. So there's been studies done that even if you take a group of strangers and say, okay, everyone on the left side of the room is a team, and everyone on the right side of the room is a different team, all of a sudden our brains, if I'm on the left, are more empathetic to the team that I'm part of. They're more motivated to self-sacrifice versus the other group or the out group. And so this relatedness idea is also quite strong. And then the F is fairness. So as the name suggests, it's like, perception of a fair exchange. Is the person who is making decisions, making them in a way with, being equitable in mind? And an interesting thing that I learned from the Neuroscience Leadership Institute is this is much more strongly activated if the human is making the offer. If it's an AI or a robot, right? It's like, okay, well, whatever. It's just it's a tool. But if it's a person, then all of a sudden we get activated if that need is not being met. So
Is there a personality that fits this well, that flows? I mean, every change is going to cause some sort of stress. If you're getting married and you want to get married, there's still stress
sure.
versus, funeral, right? Both are high stress spaces for a lot of people. Is there a personality type that does well in that space versus other types that, oh my gosh, you got to really help shepherd them through the transition?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I would actually want to go with put my academic hat on and look at some of the research behind this. So there's a good frame for the big 5 personality traits, which are, if I can get this right, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, which I think they're trying to change that last one just because it's a little charged, but the acronym there is OCEAN. And so there's these personality traits that have been scientifically validated over the years. So my guess is that, sure, maybe there's people who are more open and more agreeable who tend to do better with many kinds of change, and perhaps those who are high on the neuroticism scale do less well with change. But I would want to validate that for sure. But those are, that's a good question. I'll have to think on it.
Controlling the controllables.
Yeah.
So I mean, at the end of the day, something is. I'm driving down the highway. I've repeated the story several times on other podcasts. I'm driving down the highway, and I'm going, "Why is this person in front of me? They're driving slow. They're in the passing lane. Please move over." There's lots, and you're keeping pace with the other person. And my wife goes, "Oh, perhaps you're missing something you don't want to encounter, and this is just that air gap between your here where you don't wanna be, but, you would be if you were otherwise motoring along." How you kinda go, so in other words, I have to control how I perceive the situation. I can't resolve it. I mean, I can honk the horn. I can do something aggressive. That's not what I wanna do. I don't like demerit points. And yeah, carnage, no. So how do I get into that space of going, "I can control that. What else can I control?"
Yeah. Well, I think you're on the right track, and that example, I think that's right. I think it's starting with introspection, right? Because fundamentally, your own internal experience is entirely within your control. People can do all kinds of things out here, but you get to modulate how you respond internally, and then how that leads to words and behaviors and actions that you take externally, right? So I really think that is step one. It's like, understand that no one gets to control how you respond in situations. And I actually think that that's something that gets missed a lot of the time. So going back to this idea of a practice around, change fitness, but also just human behavior, it's like if you can understand that I can be angry internally and honor that when somebody's cutting me off on the highway or like, whatever it is, I don't have to translate that to honking the horn or yelling and screaming or whatever it is. I can, but that's a choice. And that's a choice that I am making. And so becoming more conscious about those things and knowing that you have the power to do that, hopefully can really be a nice mindset shift. And, again, from that place, having the power of choice to be like, do I want to confront this jerk? And let them know? Or do I want to just take a deep breath and let it go because it's just not worth it? What's most important here? Maybe it's my relationship to my wife who's watching this whole movie unfold going like, here we go again. So yeah, so I love that example that you shared. It's it's a really good one.
So we've just talked about, managing the controllables that are in your space because it's introspection, your perception. How do you unfold that for a team? And two actually, this is a two-part question. Team as in peers around you or direct reports, and then the bigger your organization gets, right? The people underneath that are reporting back to you in some way, shape, or form also form part of that team. So I worked in an institution that had 10,000 staff. And another 10,000 wrapped around it that weren't on payroll. The CEO is going, I need to change how we look at something, right? And then,
Mhm.
get it across. How do you affect that change in a immediate space
Yeah.
and then in a larger space?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a similar model. So I look at organizations, sort of on the individual level, the team level, and then the broader organizational level. And I firmly believe everything starts with the individual, because this is all about human behavior. So I think it's the same idea. So if I'm thinking about managing the last team I had as a head of people, I would try my best to basically say, and this is a framework called I think it's the three W's and plus H. So that I would give them the what, the why, and either the when or the who, depending on the context, but I would let them figure out the how. And so they would be able to sort of understand the big points and then actually figure out and have the autonomy, again, to go about the task or the initiative or the deliverable and, and sort it. And within that, understand what about our process or our philosophy or approach needs to change and have the power to assert how that's going to look. So that's I think on a small team, hopefully that kind of mindset starts to then take hold and over time give people more freedom within the framework and more flexibility and more risk tolerance in which to raise their hand and say in bigger scenarios like, I really just don't think that this performance review cycle is working. It's we just really need to change the tool or we really need to completely shift the way that we're even thinking about the biannual review process and move toward a more continuous feedback model, right? Versus a task or a simple initiative and with lower stakes. Yeah. So that's how I think about it.
Is this like a lead by example also effect that you're going to see? So sometimes showing someone, think of swimming, right? And someone
Hmm.
says, "Listen, you can do this from this distance to this distance underwater." Or military training, for example, right? You always have to push that limit and push harder and harder. It's has been done. How do you? And again, is that a demonstration piece, or do you work it up as in practice makes perfect, so you get into harmony with what you have to do?
Yeah. In the swimming allegory, it's absolutely practice, day in and day out and recognize, I mean, some days I'd wake up and feel great and be ready to go mentally, physically. I had a good sleep last night. I don't have any exams tomorrow and I can just really focus on having the best practice I can. Other days I wake up and I'm like, I want to be here. I'm grumpy. Right. And the coach is still there telling you, holding the high performance bar. It's like, this is the set and these are the times and this is what's going to happen. But some coaches may not like this, but as an athlete, you still get choice, right? You are the executor. So, so you get to sort of say, all right, look, I'm going to hold back a little bit on this one because I'm just not feeling it today, but I'm going to try harder on this next set because that feels more within my capability in this moment. That's the way it is. That's human experience. And I think some of the best coaches, by the way, understand this and can work within that and kind of play in the mental part of the game as well. In business, same deal, right? I don't expect myself, heaven knows, or my team to show up with 110% of energy and gusto all day long. And, as a consultant, when I see that in managers or, leaders I work with, it's a question. I'm like, hey, we're a little binary in our approach here. Yes, we want a high performance bar, but let's build a bit more reality into what that means, because everybody's reading the news these days and it's not exactly pleasant, and everybody's got all kinds of anxieties about whether AI is going to take their jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And this is real. This means people are not going to show up perfectly all the time. In fact, they're going to show up scared and burned out and all the things. So we've got to embrace this and not pretend it doesn't exist in order to be effective.
So a lot of times when change comes about is because it could be the circumstance of the business. So there has to be an adjustment. There's lots of companies over time that manufactured, and I'm thinking like Kodak, they manufactured certain products and they wanted to do a pivot, and imagine the conversations behind the pivot when someone is saying, hi, try this. They didn't go with it, or Blockbuster, for example, right? That's a really classic one,
Such a good one.
right?
Yep.
And they didn't get into the subscription service, hence
Mm-hmm.
Netflix.
Yep.
And by the way, none of these companies are paying for their names to be mentioned here, by the way. How do you, as a company owner then, if you were the company owner, how would you want to handle a pivot? Because you're going, yeah, the old way's not working. And
Yep.
if we stay on the path, everybody's really going to have a lot of anxiety because I have to lay everybody off. We're
Yep.
not going to have money and the company will collapse. So I have to change and I have a path. Two questions come to mind. Do you do modeling to help explain and see the pitfalls, or do you just kind of step your foot into it and then play it by ear?
Yeah. Well, I would say a little of column A, a little of column B, right? I think that the first step is to really, really have a think about what is the most important outcome you're trying to achieve. Is it, and within that, it's like, what is the genesis for the pivot? What is your hypothesis? And what is the end state that you're, the from to? And I actually think that sometimes there's too many assumptions that get unstated in these kinds of moments. The CEO may assume it's all about, I don't know, increasing ARR and like making sure that your company position in the market is, comes out stronger according to a certain set of metrics. And the COO might actually say, actually, I think it's about just working with our sales team and our marketing team and our customer service team on the kinds of clients that we want and thinking through a whole different strategy to, around go to market. And the CPO, Chief People Officer in this case, may have a totally different point of view and say, actually, it's about building culture and transformation and thinking about, AI in a new way. And it's probably all of those things, but it's like getting really clear on what is the most important thing we're trying to achieve and what does it look like. And actually, if you can, it's a go slow to go fast. If you can get that right up front, it saves a lot of time later and a lot of rework, and it informs how do you then model, back to your point, how do you then communicate with the rest of the organization, however big or small. You can't solve for everything everywhere all at once. It's not a good strategy. It creates thrash, and it's not clear for people who are trying to do the work and execute.
I think the use of the word thrash, it's not going well. It would be the immediate relationship there. Greg's Hardin's book. Walk me around what you're getting from that and what the key point is from Greg's book.
Yeah. So Greg Hardin was, rest in peace. Greg was a performance coach for over 30 years at the University of Michigan. So I, by the way, have my cup here, go blue. He worked with some of the most elite athletes, that we know, Michael Phelps, Tom Brady, countless others. And Control the Controllables is one of the chapters in his book. I don't think he invented the term, but I think he really put some life, and color into it. And, again, it's all about, you can't control the circumstances, but you can control how you respond to them. And I think another thing that I really took from that book is around self-belief. And this is a concept that's talked about all the time as far as confidence, and we go back to fear and self-doubt in moments of change. And I think one of the things that it really matters is just normalizing this and having conversations around change is happening to us right now. There are ways that we can manage change. There's a change curve that we can go down. And this is part of the human experience. And I think a lot of organizations miss that. They just dive into the change and just do it, right? And everybody's just supposed to figure it out and deal with that internal, experience on their own. And it's like actually, once again, abundance mindset. Let's bring in the fact that this is scary. There's a transition going on in here while the change is going on out here. And your inner critics and your, scarves, right, are being activated. So how do we deal with all that? And I coach around that a lot. So I would say I have Greg Harden to thank in part for how I approach these sorts of conversations.
When a company says, "Hey, we need help. We're about to go through some change," versus we're going through change and loads of thrashing that's transpiring. How long does it take them to kind of typically? Well, it all depends, right? Size,
Totally.
type of business it is, et cetera. Are they change sensitive? Are they prone not to change?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
How long does it take normally to like, okay, assuming you're not using electroshock therapy to shock them out of their past habits?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess I would answer it this way. I would say it takes as long as it takes to get out of things like that sound like this. Like, well, that's just not the way that we do things around here. Or let's prioritize that to Q4. And it's Q2, right? Or one of my favorite ones actually is again another controversial is well, we just don't have enough data, and so we're just going to keep on the path. Now, for all my data enthusiasts in the room, data is important. It is necessary. However, I do think analysis paralysis can be real, and I have seen leaders sometimes kind of hide behind this lack of data and use it as an excuse for not trying things. So I would say if you hear things like that or you're saying them in organizations, you're going to delay that change process in perpetuity. And if you can instead shift to, well, how might we do things around here? Or, well, what would trying this on a small scale look like, right? That's, low stakes, not going to impact our financials, to learn more information. Then you're starting on the path of change, to just sort of open up the aperture from like change resistor, change denial into change curious and forward.
I'm just as you're talking to me about this, I'm looking over your shoulder because on the screen, although the guests can't see it, is an iceberg, right? And like, there's a
Yep.
little bit up and there's a lot down below.
Yep.
Uh, the meat of it's below the surface. So is that kind of metaphor then for
Oh
what's
yeah.
happening?
Yep. No doubt. That is an intentional metaphor. Yes. So my work is all about finding out what is under the iceberg. There's the things that you can see on the surface, and then there's the what's really going on of it all. And I find time and time again, and this happened to me, by the way, when I, was a head of people and a head of studio operations, that the more senior you get, the less people tell you the truth, right? And the more that you are prone to that bias of, well, I know what's going on in my organization. I have a complete understanding. I have the purview, right? But at the end of the day, you are still only a perspective of one, right? And there are however many other perspectives your organization holds. And so it is always so important to stay curious and to ask, well, what don't I know? There's always something we don't know. Yeah, it just is, right? And so I think the leaders who have figured that out and balance this abilities to ask questions versus making super directive, closed-ended statements in moments of group discussion and brainstorm, and leaders who, again, have that learning orientation and encourage it and embody that themselves, and then encourage their organization to go find out and bring me new data or new perspectives are the ones that are really going to succeed in the future. And that's the stuff that's the below the iceberg, and we go back to human behavior. Organizations are illogical, right? They're made of human beings who have these emotions and these feelings that drive behaviors. And that's no matter how big or small you are, that's just the way it is. And so I always like to get underneath how are humans behaving in the workplace in ways that serve you and ways that do not. And yeah, and I think there's always an aha there, no matter how much you think you figured out the root cause and the symptoms and the root cause and the problem and the solution.
And the most adaptive is not biased, but driven by age, culture, or orientation. And I leave that open because growing up, there used to be two. A third one would be asexual, and then all of a sudden there's a kind of a panorama, and which is fine. It's like, okay, but do you find that if someone has either by age or by culture or even
Yeah,
by industry that,
yeah,
they flow well with change. They might need not that they're totally impervious to having hiccups or
yeah,
thrashing, but,
yeah.
is there a tendency that you find that happens well?
Well, on the generational point, I will say this. I do, I read some interesting articles on this recently, about how the generational quote unquote divide is actually just this big cover story for for people who are just simply not understanding one another's lived experiences, and that extends to, in some ways, being closed or open to change. So look, maybe, I think that I will say this, I think that there are, when human beings are placed in different contexts, taking me as a small example, this is very small, if I'm working in banking versus consulting, it's a totally different context. New York versus San Francisco, totally different context. I am adapting my behavior and changing whether I know it or not based on the role that I'm in, the company values, who's my boss, what are the expectations. And so I would say, keeping in mind that the organizational conditions and that matter, and then you are actually changing and adapting and behaving in ways that in reaction to those conditions is important. And that's irrespective of gender, age, race, generations, etc. I will let the other folks who are much more versed than me on diversity and inclusion comment beyond that, but that's how I think about it from a change perspective.
Well, not so much for diversity, and I know DEI is a trigger button for some folks,
Yeah.
but I've also understand that if you've only lived in one box and never seen any other boxes
Yeah.
around you, right, in
Yep.
other spaces.
Yep.
People that have traveled have gone to other countries, right, and just for a visit, not to live there permanently, or have immigrated,
Absolutely.
which can be another hot button topic. But I'm thinking here in Canada, some people have come in, and it's some of the staff I used to hire used to be new to Canada, either first or second generation, and some of the best crew. Not that local folks weren't ideal, but having a mix sometimes really helps because then
Yes.
you're not getting. I guess what I'm asking here, and it just kind of came to my head, is homogenous, meaning that sometimes you're not really going to adapt well, and in which case you might have a Darwinian moment, which you don't want. You want a successful Darwinian moment where you evolve into another state. Is homogeneity the kind of a block?
I think it can be. Yeah, I absolutely think it can be. I think it is a way a lot of people get entrenched in their own belief and perspective. It's like, the yelling into, not the void, I guess, but into the ether, the same sorts of people with the same mindsets as you. And first of all, there is value there, right? Like, that's community can help with just feeling solidarity in really hard times, which, Lord knows we got plenty of those these days, and deepening one's sense of core personal values, right? And once again, normalizing the experience. So all of these things have a purpose and a place. When it comes to change, I would say absolutely seeking out other perspectives, whether it's through travel or asking somebody who doesn't look like you or has just had a different path is critical, because we are all perspectives of one. I like to say there's very few truths with a capital T. There's lots of truths with a lowercase t, and they're valid. This is like the complexity of human experience. And so, yeah, I think doing that absolutely creates empathy for others. I think it opens the door to more questions. And I think it helps with this idea that not only is change not linear and complicated, but it's something you have to continually reevaluate and again practice, which is why, going back to why I think change fitness is such a better moniker than projectifying it or trying to overly exert control over a thing that actually can't be controlled.
So if a company is really good at change fitness, what will they look like 10 years down the pipe?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I would say, I would assume if a company is good at change fitness, that means they're really good at they built a learning orientation. So what I mean by that is, I think, growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So, right, rewarding curiosity and curious behaviors, asking questions, for example, and having the intellectual humility to say, I didn't know that, or I don't know now, or I'm wrong, but I'll go figure it out. Or, not being in some cases, and this is Bay Area tech talking here, like being so obsessed with my product or my like widget or my fancy solution that no one's thought of before, and not realizing that actually the customers are the ones that are going to tell you what they need. And, just being able to let go of your original vision as it was created, and being able to truly listen without ego or reserve, even if you think that those customers are like, off the rocker. Guess what? They're the ones buying your product or your service or your widget. And so, yeah, so I really think that being able to learn, and, again, with the pace of AI evolving as rapidly as it is, you have to, it's the adapt or die is the thing I keep seeing and hearing. And by the way, those organizations need the structure and the systems to support those kinds of behaviors, right? So they should show up in performance reviews, executive coaching, which is one of my personal offerings and favorite things, should always be part of that. Having things like postmortems or premortems around major projects so that everybody can understand what went well and what we need to do better next time, right? And all that stuff has to be there. And I think in order to support change fitness, and another way of saying it is, adaptable and resilient cultures.
So when should a company go, I think we're having carnage, thrashing, the usual suspects.
Yeah.
Obviously, staff turnover, people are anxious. They're snapping to each other in an unusual pattern of behavior, like the baseline behavior from before
Oh,
is
yeah.
no longer. It's disruptive. Long and the short of it, you're not having success. You're not enjoying yourself, and not generating money, or you're losing money. When should they call you? Like what should be the tells? What should be the flags? I mean, I've just listed
Yeah.
a whole bunch of things, but I did it with a bit of comic flair. But when should they actually go? Hang on,
Yeah, yeah.
maybe running off the cliff here.
Totally. Well, I mean, in a perfect world, in Paige's perfect happy place, it would be before all of those things start happening. When, as a leader, if you're looking around corners at your business and you have, I don't know, a new strategic initiative coming up, or even in just the sort of day-to-day course of business, you're kind of saying, there's just a couple things here that I've just got my eye on. They haven't blown up yet, right? But they could. So I think that's actually the best possible place, because it's harder when you are already in the path, in the muck. That being said, I'm a realist. I get it, right? We're in the muck. If you're feeling as a leader, if you're stuck or you're uncertain or alone in making a big decision, and how to execute those big decisions, like things that are going to elicit change. So, or if you've done the change, or they're thinking, okay, now what? Now, how do we bounce back? How do we build that resilience that we need? So to make it concrete, I would say if you're, as an example, an organization that's growing rapidly and figuring out like what got us here to, I don't know, like, our initial funding stage, and, with a team of 20 and being scrappy and just kind of getting on the phone. We need to get on the phone and figuring it out. But now we're going to grow to a team of 50 or more, and we have to start to integrate systems, and we have to have things like a proper HR and IT, and, a more robust finance process. And again, the AI of it all. How do I integrate that whole thing, without just throwing the tech at people and letting them figure it out? That's a good moment. Or conversely, having been here, if you are needing to stabilize after a layoff and needing to motivate people, if you need a go forward vision and, get people back on the wagon, there's just been a big change there, for all obvious reasons. I would say that's another area I unfortunately have a good amount of experience with, but feel like I can provide EQ support and IQ and support and all kinds of other things.
So I'm going to bring us off to our close here. So you have a special offer, and if someone wants help, what should they do?
Well, so you've named my website, partnerwithpaige.com. There is a very easy 10-minute, 20-question little survey that you can take, make a copy, please, for your own purposes. And you can take just to get an understanding and a handle on sort of from a 360-degree perspective, might we be doing well, and where do we potentially have some work to do from an organizational health perspective. It's free. You can take that and noodle on it and do whatever you want with it. I put it out there and if this adds value to someone in the world, I'm thrilled, right? And it's based on the McKinsey Organizational Health Index. So it's, it comes from a place of research and good standing. Yeah. So I'd say that's one. And I'm also offering a limited number of coaching sessions this month, when I believe the podcast is coming out. So you can email me at paige@partnerwithpaige.com or through my website, and first takers will have 45 minutes with me to just go through, where are you now? Where do you hope to be, and what's standing in your way?
Folks, I want to say that reach out to Paige. You've got nothing really to lose, but you do if you don't. It's like, not wearing the seatbelt when you should have. It's kind of handy. So she helps leaders stop pretending change is fine and work with the change that's happening. Start building the real capacity to move through it, because it's not just you, it's your team around you, your organization, your customers even. And she's there to give you more than just a motivational poster. She's there to help you understand what's actually happening below the surface, much like an iceberg, right? So you don't want to be the Titanic, because that's never an upside. And you know what? If any of this kind of hits home, that's your signal. Give her a shout.
Everything you heard today is for educational purposes only. It's not professional advice. Before you act on anything, Talk to a certified expert in your area. Your accountant, your lawyer, someone who knows your situation. We share perspectives. You make the decisions. Want more? Head over to blog.knack4business.com, packed with practical episodes on AI, marketing, leadership, and growth. No fluff, just the good stuff. Subscribe while you're there. Until next time, keep building.